Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca and I'm going to guide you through the colorful world painting. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and go over the supplies that I have laying out in front of me right now. So I've got my canvas, and if you've got the kit that we sent to you, it comes pre-stenciled right here, and this is what yours will look like when you get it. I've got my colors on my palette, and I've separated my white into two piles. If you just leave some in your cup for later, that's also a good way to keep some of it pure white so you can get to it later and keep using it without it getting tinted. And then I've got black, and then I've got my primary colors, yellow, red, and blue, and that's also gonna make the rainbow colors that are on the umbrella. So they'll be able to make any colors that you can imagine with just those if you wanna even change your colors for anything else on the painting. My brushes, I do have a foam brush. If you don't have one of these in your kit, then just your largest one will do. And then I've got just a range of brushes right here, small, medium, and a large or medium kind of brush, and then a pointed medium brush. And then of course I've got my water right here in this nice dirty cup, and then I've got my paper towels right here ready to go. So the first step for this painting, we're just gonna dive right in because it needs to dry, so we wanna get this first layer in here. So what we're gonna do is paint the background with a gradation of gray. So we're gonna do the palest around the figure here, and then we're gonna do a little bit of darkening, and while that's all dry, we can start working in on the figure right here and getting an umbrella and the skirts and everything like that in. So let's go ahead and dive right in with our foam brush first. So we wanna get this wet first, so I'm just gonna kind of submerge it into my water cup. And then like any sponge, you can go ahead and squeeze off any extra water. You just don't want it dripping wet, but you do want it damp to help that paint spread around. And then we're gonna mix a pale gray. Now with this, you wanna add only a tiny, tiny bit of black because it's gonna be darker when it dries no matter what, and we want this to be way more pale, and then we can darken it as it goes out. So what I'm gonna do is kind of divide a good portion of my white away, and then I'm gonna take just kind of the corner of my foam brush, stir that in, and add tiny, tiny, tiny amounts of black at a time just to barely tint this. We wanna go towards a dove gray. Now, of course, any colors that I suggest mixing here, you guys can deviate from the plan. And then this does not have to be this pale. She'll still kind of pop out from the background, even if it's a little bit darker. So I've got this stirred. Again, it's barely off-white and it'll darken. And we can always darken it if we need to later on, but lightening it up is a little bit harder to paint these kind of transparent colors any darker. Or lighten them. I hope you guys are having a wonderful Saturday. It's beautiful weather out there. And what a fun day to paint too. Looking outside, painting, seeing the clear sky. I'm gonna go all the way up to the figure, and with the corner of this brush, you can really kind of razor in these small areas. Again, if you're using a smaller brush, it's just gonna take you a little bit longer, but you can still do the whole thing in whatever size you have. So I'm just gonna kind of first edge out everything on the umbrella, and then around the figure as well. If you hear any talking in the background, we've got our mailman coming in to grab packages to go out to people who got kits. Might be yours, sitting there waiting for him to pick up. All right, and then if you go over your lines right here for your stencil, it's transparent enough that you can see through to them. So if you accidentally cover it up and it's a little bit thick, just go back in and kind of scrub some of the extra paint out, and that'll make it transparent. So if you're hesitating to try to be really precise and it's taking you a little while, don't worry about it. Just go over the lines completely. We're gonna paint them anyway. All right, so I've just kind of messily scrubbed around here, and then I'm gonna try to stretch this color out just a little bit farther. I want this to still be wet in order for me to blend into it, to darken. So I'm gonna try to get this filled in quickly. And you guys feel free to leave any questions or comments in the comments area. and we will be quick to answer them. And Brad, who's working on the IT stuff, can forward me any questions that you have if you guys are watching live. All right, so now that we made a big mess out of it, let's go ahead and darken our color. I'm just gonna pull in a tiny bit more black. If you need to mix a new color, stir on top of that old pile so you can really discern what is darker. I'm gonna go a couple shades darker. We wanna go into this quickly next so we can mix into it so it blends just a tiny bit. I'm gonna start on the perimeter, and then I'm gonna slowly work my way in. And this is just the background layer, so it being messy is only gonna add to the aesthetic. So don't feel like you have to do a clean, even blending. We're gonna go in and mess it up anyway with our like trees and branches and things. So we're just looking to get a little bit of that gradation in there with this first layer, and then we'll add even more. So again, don't try to make it look pretty. All right, and then...
Hold on, Rebecca. Let's see. We might not actually be live.
I don't want to talk about it.
Oh, dear God.
I'm sorry, what?
I think I screwed up.
Okay,
Oh,
so
no, we can see it. Okay.
did you just swear live? Cool. So I am slowly darkening the outside edge. A lot of this at the bottom is going to get covered up, so it's not super important that it be anything specific, but at the top, it's a little bit more important. All right, but up at the very, very top, I'm going to try to do kind of the first layer of the leaves. My brush is a little bit more dried out right now, and I want to make sure that there's moisture in there so that it blends and just kind of extends the life of the paint. If it's dried out too much, it's not a big deal. We'll just kind of faux add the first layer of leaves. I'm going to go a couple shades darker. I'm going to start in the corners, and that's a good place to test your color. If you feel like it's too dark, you can lighten it. And then you can always pick up more white and blend it out if you need to. But right now I just want to darken those corners, and then we'll have a couple more layers of grayery down this, on top of this. So we'll be able to kind of cover up some things, but this will be good foundation for all of that. So I want to take this down. I'm just kind of marking out about halfway down the canvas. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start twisting and pouncing my brush as I go out towards those edges, and I'm going to get as close to that umbrella as I can while still leaving kind of a ring of pale color. I'll, with my smaller brush, add prettier details of leaves, but right now, again, this is going to be just kind of the foundation for those later on. So I'm just going to create this darker gray, and when I get to the edges, again, I'm going to take my corner of my brush and do a little bit more pouncing. I'm going to leave the top mostly empty. I'll come back with my, again, my smaller brush to do those later on. But this helps the paint, if you do it quickly, this helps kind of just to blend it out so it's not as aggressive feeling to put this on. And I'm just going to start pouncing in the beginnings of what those trees will look like. And then you can use the same brush, or you can use a smaller one. I'm going to turn my brush because it's got this razor edge right here. I can turn on its side and get some trees in the side right here. Again, don't stress if it looks just a little funky. We're gonna add more leaves and things on top of all of this. So I'm just kind of randomly, haphazardly putting in some trees. And then final step to this part with this brush, I'm gonna turn it on its side and put in a little bit of earth coming down the side. And the goal for this is that it gets a little bit thicker towards the edge of the canvas, and as it goes, I'm kind of shooting for maybe the corner of her skirt. As it tapers off here, it's gonna get a little bit narrower. So this is almost just sketching in the final design proportions, and we'll make it all look much more cohesive with our little brush, with our final touches. So this is really just gonna give us an idea of where everything needs to go. So let's say that the bottom of these start about 3 fingers up on either side, and then they taper from that point, about 3 fingers up, towards her skirt, the corners of her skirt, and then they just kind of come in straight from here. So generally the proportions for that, you do not have to match that exactly. And anything that you end up with as far as those proportions go, it just means that we're looking at it at a slightly different angle. It doesn't change the painting in any way. So if your proportions end up different, that just means your painting is just gonna look like maybe we're slightly looking at her from down below or up above. It won't change the painting in any way that really matters. So I'm going to leave this part alone. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in my water cup and just fully submerge it in there so it doesn't dry out. If you never plan to use this brush again, you can leave it to dry out, or you can go clean it in your water cup and completely get it squished out like any sponge would. And we can go ahead, while this is kind of drying just a little bit more, we're gonna go ahead and do our first layers in kind of her skirt and everything, and then we could probably come down and do the walkway. We won't need many dry breaks for this painting because we've got little areas we can jump around to. That being said though, you guys, pause as often as you need to while you are painting. Pause as much as you need to. This is live right now, but in the recording and right now you can pause it and play it and rewind it as much as you need to. I kind of paint at a breakneck speed so that the video is just a little more entertaining. There's not as much pausing if I'm doing things right. But if you need to stop it, don't feel rushed by me. Just know that you can stop it at any time. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the first layer, like I said, into her skirt because I wanna let this dry. So I'm gonna force myself to work on something else so that I do give it a chance to get a little bit drier before we move on. Plus it makes it feel better to not have so much white in the middle of my canvas. So I like to get that out of the way so I stop looking at white canvas as quickly as possible. So we're gonna go ahead and do the skirt first, just because we can. So I'm gonna use my medium-sized brush just to try to fill in the large area first. And of course, everything is in gradations of gray. So when it comes to trying to make sure that this is all as dynamic as possible, the only thing you really need to do is make sure that any gray that's sitting next to another gray is just not the same shade, whether it be lighter or darker. The only way to make things stand out is if they are a completely different shade from each other, completely different value, technically. Shade would be color, value would be on the spectrum of gray, how dark or how light something would be. So when it comes to her skirt, if your background was a little bit darker than mine, all you have to do is make sure that her skirt is darker than that, or lighter if you want to turn it white, whatever you'd like to do. So that's really the key to painting in grays and tones of gray, is making sure that everything is just a slightly different hue than what's next to it. Hue being the wrong word, it's tone, value. So those are not technically interchangeable, but I'll probably use them interchangeably in the instructions, so good luck. All right, so what I'm gonna do is start with a really dark gray, so I'm going to take some black and then add little bits of white onto that. So I just want it right off black, and then we'll do outlining in black, so this is just gonna be a couple shades lighter than that. We'll add some highlights on top of it as well. So I'm gonna keep mixing just kind of on top of this original gray pile. That helps me also figure out how dark something is compared to the last color I mixed, but you can just kind of keep stirring on top of that and be fine. So with her umbrella right here, what you can do is you can plant your paintbrush up to the corner where that line stopped, and you can kind of put your brush flat and razor line right there, and that'll help you figure out where the end of the skirt needs to go. So this is the kind of the darkest shade until we do the outlining. It's gonna be the darkest shade of the skirt. So what I'm gonna do is fill in the whole thing with the dark, and I'm gonna come down to her legs, and you can make this bend or kind of ruffle at the bottom if you'd like to, or you can make her skirt go straight across, whatever you'd like. And then again, I'm just gonna fill this in. I'm gonna do a little bit of wet and wet painting so it'll blend kind of naturally without having to mix a bunch of different shades. So I'll fill this in kind of quickly and then I'll jump into the next bit. I am the master of never mixing enough paint the first time. And what I like about painting in grays is that it just adds more fun detail if your grays do not match. So it'll really look like you did it on purpose. Okay, so what I want to do next is start getting just a little bit more streaks of color in here. So I just kind of wipe off the extra off on my paper towel, then I grab a little bit of white on my brush. I'm going to turn it on its side, and I'm going to start going up and down, curving my brush. In the center, my curves are going to go kind of almost up and down, and as it goes to the side, they're going to rotate with whatever the angle of that skirt is. So it's going to rotate and follow the direction of the skirt edge here on either side, and I'll switch that. And then towards the center, it'll go pretty much straight up and down. I'm just going to kind of drag until I feel like it's blended enough. If you want it to be brighter than that, chances are you're going to want to wait for it to dry instead of trying to get this to work, because it'll keep picking up more of that black and darkening your color. I'm going to go ahead and put this brush in my water, and I'm going to put a little bit of a band around her waist with one of my smaller brushes. So I'll pick up some white, and I know it's still wet up there, so it's not going to stay white. It'll blend in very quickly. That black overpowers the white very fast. And then I'm going to do a stripe across, just kind of the width of that brush pushed all the way down. I'm going to give her a belt. And then if you want to take this brush and add little bits of highlight, this won't blend in as fast as the other one because it's a little bit cleaner of a brush. I like to just kind of drag in last touches of highlight. And you can see the reason I curve my brush like that, you can see how three-dimensional changing your brush strokes makes the skirt, because everything that you do with a brush is describing a shape. Every brush stroke does matter in what you're trying to convey. We're tricking the eye into making it look three-dimensional just by curving our brush strokes. So that's not something to I guess, ignore. It's something that you want to have a little bit of fun with, is kind of tricking the eye into making it look like this is really a three-dimensional object just by changing your brush stroke. If you did it the opposite way, it would look like her skirt was blowing inwards. So you can do a lot to trick the eye. You can make her skin however light or dark as you would like. So I'm going to do something similar to the dove gray from before and fill that in her legs all the way up to her skirt. The walkway is going to be darker in just a moment, so this just needs to be, this can be the same color as the dove gray behind it, and we will make it pop out of there in not too long. Don't forget that pause button. I know I've just jumped about 3 steps ahead by finishing up that skirt and working my way downwards, so please don't hesitate to pause if you need to. We'll do a dry break in a minute just to have anyone who's going with us right now, give them a little bit of time to catch up. I'm gonna go ahead and fill her legs in, and then however dark you want her shoes to be. I'm gonna go in with a smaller brush to do that. And then also add some dividing lines between her legs. So we'll eventually do maybe some outlining around her legs, but for right now, I'll go ahead and do the dividing line in between. And just do a couple shades darker. You don't want it to be black on top of white legs. Just whatever makes it look like that contrast is accurate to whatever color you mixed. And if you want to get really fancy, you could take some of your dark and put shadows on the top of her legs. And I'm curving it to make it look like the calves are a little bit rounded here. You can just do it straight across though. So again, whatever darkness makes it look accurate for whatever color you ended up mixing. And then again, when we darken the pathway, it'll make it look even better. All right, and then again, whatever color you want her shoes to be, this is where you could bring in some color if you want to. I'm gonna go in with a dark, pretty much black. And then one thing is you'll see on the right-hand side, the shoe, her leg, descends a little bit lower because it's the one that's behind. It makes it look like she's stepping forward. So you want the edge of the shoe to be a little bit lower. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of establish one of the shoes, and then the one on the right-hand side should go lower. So I'm just gonna do this one first. I've curved downwards for the top of that boot or shoe that she's got. Curved the top downwards. And then I gave it a little bit of a detail out to the side where it looks like it's kind of coming away from her ankle just a little bit. And then you just have to make the other one a little bit taller on the left-hand side. And I'll make it look like the one in the background is sitting up there. Now don't forget, if you're having any trouble hearing me or any issues with the video, go ahead and leave a comment. We are still learning how to do this. And we want to make sure that we are learning as we go. So feel free to give us any feedback to things that do or do not work for you. And we would love to hear it and get better at doing these live streams. They're surprisingly complicated. And again, we'd just love to hear from you. See if there's anything that is or is not working. Or if you guys are having fun, we would absolutely love to hear it. So just leave a hello if you're watching. Maybe say what city you're watching from. It's always good to hear from friends. All right, and so what I'm gonna do is go ahead and give you guys just a few minutes to catch up, fill in the bottom area of the skirt and everything like that, and then we'll dive into the rest in no time, and we'll start doing layering on top. This also gives this area a little minute to dry too, so that we can just kind of fill in the rest. I'll blow dry off screen, but I'm gonna give you guys just a few minutes to catch up, or pause if you need to, and I'll see you again in a minute. Okay, we're back. All right, so I feel like we should probably get the walkway in next, just to make it look pretty. So then we'll get that dark in there, and then we'll probably take up that same kind of gray and start filling in the trees. And very soon we're gonna go ahead and fill in the umbrella. That's the word for it. And go ahead and decide now if you want to change the color of your umbrella. If you want it to be all one color, we're going to do, of course, the kind of the spectrum of colors, the rainbow kind of look. It's more like a color wheel technically. But go ahead and decide now if you want to change that. You can do literally any color in the world if you'd like to. So again, let's go ahead and get the walkway in. I'm going to go with my largest brush, not the foam brush, but the larger brushy brush. I probably won't use the foam brush for the rest of the painting, so when I say large brush, just assume it's this one. So let's go ahead and start with either black or really, really dark gray. So I'm going to go in with a really dark gray, and then you can always do a black outline later on. So I'm going to mix that, and you can see I twist my brush, and I make sure that the gray is mixed on both sides, so I don't get this random like pocket of black or white as we go. So similar to how we did it before as far as proportions go, I'm going to go about 3 fingers up on the left hand side and right hand side. I'm going to give myself little tick marks, and that'll show me where I want to go as far as the angles. And then I'm going to go a tiny bit higher than the bottom of her skirt on either side, and I give myself little tick marks. Probably give yourself about a finger in between, more or less. And then all it is you're going to connect the dots on either side, and don't worry about trying to make it look tidy. Again, this painting is really, it's fun and graphic because it's got so much texture just with the messy brush strokes, and it'll be even more so with the leaves on, so don't feel like you have to make everything super smooth or polished. Let some of your brush strokes show. It's always really fun. So we're going to do the same thing where we do a kind of a gradation going inward. So start on one side, and we can kind of travel over to the other side so that you can get that gradation while it's still wet. So we're just going to pay attention to one side first. Our brush strokes are now going to go up and down because this is kind of like a wet walkway, and so we're kind of working with what will look like reflections on the walkway. So we're going to actually go directional with our brush strokes. I'm going to fill in maybe about halfway across the pathway with this dark color. And then I'm gonna wipe off my brush. I'm gonna pick up some white, maybe mix into the corner of that pile with a more pale gray. And then I'm gonna start next to that first pile of black. I just kind of do a stripe there. And then I start to slowly travel into that black, and I start going back and forth with long brush strokes into each. And I want to pick up those colors and let them, you can see them kind of traveling into each other. It is a little bit of a gradation, but I'm also leaving my brush strokes really messy and showing in there. And you can go in between your dark and your light. Do not forget to keep your brush damp though, because this is a thirsty canvas. And if you've got your heat going at home, your room is also just a little bit drier. So your paints are gonna dry quickly no matter what. So you're probably gonna have to keep your brush wetter than even normal with the cold out there. So as I go in though, and I get closer to her, I'm gonna wanna pale my gray quite a bit. And then I kind of want it to be a gray that's just darker than her skin. If you went with really dark skin, then maybe have the walkway much more pale. Again, it's all about what color is the neighbor. Whether it be lighter or darker, it just needs to be different. So I'm just gonna get in here, and we can always do another layer on top if you feel like it doesn't change enough. You can always come in with another layer and change things up as we go. And keep in mind, of course, we've also got the outline coming later, so we can always just make things pop by just giving them a nice line around them. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start in on the other side. This way I'm gonna go from the lightest to the darkest, but it's gonna be generally the same principle. Don't forget to keep your brush damp. If I say it out loud, it's because I'm running into the problem, and so I know that you guys in just a second will probably run into the same thing. So as I remind you, it's because I am also suffering. Not to be dramatic. All right, so I kind of want to just make sure first that we've got both sides of the walkway are kind of generally the same shade, and then I'm going to slowly transition over to the right hand side and make it nice and dark. And this can just be layer one if you decide to do more, but we will also do the reflections of the light from the lampposts and everything on top, as well as like the shadows underneath her shoes. So these aren't even the last brush strokes that we'll do down here. All right. And then slowly darken it. So here I plant the color next to the white. If you feel like you put too much on there, just wipe off your brush on your paper towel. And then brush stroke into both of these. I'm gonna take a quick glance and make sure that it feels even on both sides. And then darken all the way to the right hand side. I love the sound of paintbrush on canvas. I don't know, it's a good sound. Hope you guys can hear it. But it might also mean the brush is too dry, so heads up. If you can hear the little scratch, scratch, scratch. Now there is such a thing as dry brushing though, so it might be a technique. I'm not here to judge. I dry brush all the time. That phrase out of context makes no sense though, let's be real. I dry brush. Okay, so I'm just kind of leaning back from my painting and trying to decide if it's somewhat even in the gradation. I don't want every brush stroke to be the same, of course, but I want it to be pretty balanced in how quickly it goes to light or dark. And then what I'm gonna do is pick up some black. It might blend in, or you can just pick up your dark gray. If you want to be pure black, just go with it though. And I'm just gonna do a sweep of black on the edges. That'll clean up these messy brush strokes, but it'll also just give it a nice outline. And then I have it thinnest at the top, kind of a narrow brush stroke, and then I'm gonna increase the width out towards the edges so it just looks like it's coming towards us just a little bit more dynamically. And if you need to switch to a smaller brush to do any of that, go for it. So I'm also cleaning out my brush, wiping it off on my paper towel before I put it into my water. So keep that in mind as you guys are cleaning your brush, especially as you're trying to switch from a really dark gray to a really bright gray. You want to make sure that your brush stays clean so that you really have a lot more control over proportions of white and black in your brush, of course. So while this dries, what we're going to do is layer number like 1.5 of the leaves up here, and this is where we can actually start getting a little bit tidier with our leaves up here. And then we'll probably have, we'll try to segment right into doing black in those top corners, and then we'll do highlights later on. So if it feels like it's a little bit dark, heads up, it's coming, we'll save it, don't worry. So I'm gonna rinse out my brush. This is more so I don't get surprised by any black or white that maybe get backed up in my bristles. So to clean your brush very thoroughly, get it into your water cup, gently flex the bottom of your cup, make sure that water gets flushed all the way through, and then wipe off any water and drips on your paper towel. And if you've got clean water on your paper towel, you've got a clean brush. So just kind of make sure that you dab that off. What I tend to do, and I didn't even realize until I was watching like a recording of me, I also then go back and I squeeze any drops off the ferrule, the metal part of the brush, so that nothing like drips down. You might see, if you see a drop on your painting, it might be because it's coming from the ferrule later on. Just another little heads up. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a nice dark gray. Has to be nice. Has to be nice. A benevolent gray. And we really want it to be nearly this color, just maybe a couple shades darker. We don't want it to be too quick of a transition. So what you can do is you can go down here, you can touch your paint to that canvas out in this little corner over here, and maybe a little bit dark. Don't forget, it dries a little bit darker too. And we again want it to be just a couple shades darker. So test it out on your canvas. See what it does. I'm just gonna kind of push out the extra paint so it's just not super loaded with paint. And then I'm gonna go in here and we're gonna kind of duplicate what we did with the bigger brush, but now we'll be able to get finer details out in those corners. So what I do is as I come through to the edges, I'm gonna twist my brush and get little pieces of leaves on those edges, but then as I come inwards, I'm gonna more push the whole brush down and get that really filled in. And if you wanted to add more trees coming down, you can add some darker trees coming through Don't cover up all of your gray from before. That was important transition color, but this will be some nice shadows in front. And then out towards those corners, it doesn't matter as much because we're gonna fill those in with black anyway. So as I come out, I start twisting my brush, a lot less pressure using the corner of my brush. And then as I go inwards, I'm gonna start increasing and filling because I wanna bulk fill in that shape. And I'll do a little bit more up top with this shade. And if it comes down and touches her umbrella, that is fine too. We're gonna do it with falling leaves anyway. And then let's go ahead and transition to the pure black. We can always add more later, but we might finish it off really quickly with just doing that. You just want to make sure that your brush twists because you don't want every leaf to look like you pounce it at exactly the same angle. You don't want it to get too repetitive. You want it to look like there is a variety. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into my black, and I'm going to start in the corners first, get kind of this edge filled in, and then travel down the sides just a little bit, and then start breaking it up. And I want to make sure that I can see through to some of my other grays, because I don't want to cover up everything. You can still see through some branches, you can still see through some leaves, so you wouldn't lose everything in the background. You want to see some of that still peeking through, just to give it more depth. And let it mix in if you want to. And as I come out, I will take some of these really dark leaves and come through some of my lighter areas. I'll just make it look like there's some branches in the foreground that are really dark. And again, it's all about that depth. So I will take some of these black ones all the way around and down. I'm not going to do any trees in pure black because I'm going to leave that for the lamp posts. I want those to be the darkest, most dynamic part in the foreground, so I'm going to leave those. Leave them alone. Okay. There's a point where you can overwork something. I'm at that point. I'm going to not touch it anymore. And then I will go ahead and let's work on her umbrella. Again, just for fun. So here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean out my large brush and then dry it off. I don't want any drips, so I'm just gonna roll it in my paper towel, make sure there's nothing on there. I'm gonna use this as my straight edge, more or less. So this is nice and dry. If you wanna wait for this all to be dry before you move on, you'll be even safer from accidentally dragging any paint in. So keep that in mind. If you're not ready to move on, don't worry about it. I won't judge you, don't forget. And so what you can do is take the least offensive of the colors, which is yellow, and we'll go back in, once we're done with all of the colors, we'll go back in and we'll draw actual black lines to divide them once they're completely filled in. But I want to draw the line so that I can figure out where these triangles need to end. And so I'm going to do it with the yellow, which is the palest color. And what I want to do is take from corner to corner, and the dot in the center will be your guide to make sure that that is straight. And then you're going to pull that yellow, just messily, don't be too precise, across. That's going to be your guide. If it goes over the edge, just take your finger, wipe that out real quick while it's still wet. It'll just come right off. Before you go on to the next side, you can just kind of wipe off the extra yellow just in case. And then just go ahead and connect more or less tidily. Tidily? Sure, why not? These triangles. We're gonna paint everything in between, so if you run into your fingers and make little bumps, it's okay. All right. I've got caffeine shakes today. How's everyone else doing? Hope you're feeling steady. This is a nice painting to not be that steady with, though. We'll just say it's all part of the technique. Again, your center should be along the dot, so that's your middle guide for where that line should cross. What a mess. Yay. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this into my water, and then I'm not gonna use my little one until I go back to line things. I'm gonna go with my medium-sized brush, or your larger one, whatever you wanna do. Let's go ahead and fill in these areas. And once you put a rainbow or a color wheel in the middle of your painting, everything looks happier. So we're just gonna start with the top and work our way around the spectrum. It's going to be yellow in the top, and I'm going to put a little bit of white. So my white and yellow mixed together. Any of these colors, if you feel like you need 2 layers, you're going on a white canvas. So they're not going to be necessarily as dark as you might want them to be. So if you decide you need 2 layers, or if a leaf went over and you need 2 layers to cover up something, don't worry about it, just do 2 layers. But this yellow works best on a white canvas because it picks up the white behind it, so it'll stay bright. And again, we're gonna do some outlining of these, so if they're messy, it's all about getting the colors in first. So that's pizza slice number 1. So the next color is mostly yellow, and a tiny touch of your red will turn it into orange, and you can do whatever kind of shade of orange you want. Again, mostly yellow. I'm just stirring into that pile I just finished with. It's got a little white in there as well. And here is a lot of color theory. It's a good way to learn this. So a color wheel, every color in the world that's not a synthetic color can be created with the primary colors right here. So we've got yellow, red, and blue. They make up every color. It's the color wheel. You maybe heard of it. So there's only 3. So these are the primary colors. Secondary colors are when these 2 colors mix into each other. So we're about to mix them ourselves. So you'll see it all happen in front of you, but yellow and red make orange, red and blue make purple, blue and yellow make green. So that would be all of the secondary colors that we're going to be mixing to go as transitions in between each of these. So it's a really fun way to learn and see it all happen. I'm a visual learner, so until I saw the color mixtures happen, it didn't really make sense to me. So today we're learning, whether we like it or not, we're learning about primary and secondary colors and the color wheel. Then when you get to tertiary colors, that is when the secondary colors then mix in with each other. And then from there, I don't know what happens after tertiary. Fourthiary? Maybe there's not a word for that. I'm sure there's a word for that. I'm sure I've learned it. It's just gone. All right, so if you are kind of going over your shapes and the line is not as obvious as you need, I mean, you just have to get one corner. You need to make sure that color goes to your stencil, the little corner in that stencil. So I had to adjust just a little bit. And if it's not precise, that black line will go over that imprecision. It'll be fine. I'm gonna wipe off my brush before I go in with the red. Just wanna get most of that out, but the red's gonna overpower any yellow left over. So I can go right into my red. Switch to your tiny brush to get into those corners if you need to. When you're trying to get a clean edge, imagine pushing the paint instead of trying to brush it on. Push the paint to the edge, and then you have this thin line of pure paint that is a lot easier to control than trying to get your brush to behave very well. All right, so fill this in. Again, don't forget 2 layers is absolutely normal to need. Depends on how just vibrant you want the colors to be. So this is the warm side of the color wheel. We're now going to transition into the cold side. So a little bit more color theory for you. Warm colors would be anything that has yellow, and then yellow or red. And then cool colors, of course, are the opposite side. So it's like green being a secondary color, it can be a warm hue with a little bit of yellow added to it. Purple can be cold or warm, depending on how much red you put into it, things like that. So another thing is that on the color wheel, complementary colors, colors that look good together, are on the opposite side of the color wheel from each other. That's why Christmas colors are red and green, because they look amazing together. Yellow and blue look great together. And of course, anything just on the opposite side of each other, that's a complementary color. So if you're always trying to figure out, like if you're trying to decorate a room or whatever and you're trying to figure out what colors look good together, use a color wheel. It is a really useful tool for deciding. But as I'm going from a warm color to a cool color, I want to get the yellow out of my brush, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that out. And then I'm going to mix my purple. Now this will need white in it, otherwise it'll look pretty dang dark. So I'm going to grab a tiny bit of blue. Again, you don't need to mix very much of any of these colors, of course. It's going to be probably 2 parts red to 1 part blue, but let's find out. Maybe it'll need more than that. And that's just for a purple that I like. If you want it to be more on the blue side, you just add whatever you want. So I definitely tend to add more red to mine. And don't forget to add that white, otherwise it'll look black on your canvas. So we're going to do purple, and this will be our transition into blue. So I'm going to fill in the next one over. And thank you guys for choosing to spend your time, your beautiful Saturday with us today. You guys are joining us in the future. Thank you for spending time and hopefully being inspired to paint. Or if you just enjoy watching painting, appreciating the arts is almost as important as doing the arts. So thank you. We hope you're having a good time. The next color generally should be kind of this pure blue, but this blue by itself is still going to be pretty dark. So I'm going to put a tiny touch of white in it. And I'll put even more white for the next color. Mostly just the blue by itself. But it won't show up very well if it's just by itself. It's just very dark, at least compared to the other colors. So this one is the one right above her skirt. A little bit more blue. And then the next color over will be with more white added. Try to get all the colors as close to touching in the center as you can, but we will do a little black dot where the handle of the brush peeks out, so we'll be able to fill in as much as you need to in that center if you're not getting it completely filled in. And if you leave a little white line in between each of the colors, again, a little black line is coming to save the day, and not too long once it's dry. And then more white, and you can just stir into that same pile so you can really tell when it's got to that point. More white, and that'll get you the next color over. And then it's green time. And once you get it on there, if it's just not looking good next to the other one, just lighten it up maybe a little bit more. I'm gonna do that to mine. Now this isn't exactly a perfect color wheel because adding more white to blue is not a mixture of these colors. So it's not exactly right, but it does add up to the right number of sides. So that was really why we did it. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and do green. So you can mix into the same pile here, the blue and white, and go over to the edge of your pile of yellow. Pull in a little bit of yellow. We're gonna go with our darker shade first, so more blue to darken it. Still a touch of white. Whatever shade of green that you want. Go ahead and fill that in. And then the next layer over, I'm gonna do another shade of green. I'm gonna add a little extra yellow though to warm it up. So it looks like it should be the neighbor to the yellow on the wheel. It's a little bit more yellow and then white. That's gonna turn it into a really bright, kind of foresty green. Now, if it looks like a hot mess, it's because nothing has an outline yet. Promise that'll make a big difference. Okay. I'm gonna go back to my dark because my light just went into my dark green. So you can do a little bit of cleanup if you need to. It'd probably be best if you're going for cleanup on a color on the opposite side or next to, like if I need to clean up into my yellow, I wanna make sure that my yellow is a bajillion% dry. It's best to have everything dry before you do a second layer or any cleanup whatsoever, because the last thing you want is one of these colors mixing into the other. So you might as well just give it a little bit of a break no matter what. And let's go ahead and, I'm gonna go ahead and dry this off because I need to paint on this side, and I will absolutely drag my hand through these colors, and we don't want any of the rainbow happening on the background. It's all gonna stay black and white. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys just a couple minutes, maybe 2 minutes. I'm gonna do a blow dry off screen, and I will be back in just a second. Okay, we're back. So what I've got, we're gonna do the lamppost. We're gonna go ahead and do that with our, whatever medium-sized brush you have. If you have that flat brush though, that's gonna do a beautiful job as well. And if you wanna sketch them out first with your very smallest brush, that way you can have more control over how quickly they grow. Now, this is also going to be making some depth in our painting by having them, just like the walkway narrows, we're gonna have them get shorter and then taller as they come towards us. So this will give a really fun depth to your painting. So again, you can grab your smallest brush, get a little bit of black on there. Make sure your brush is damp though, so the paint flows very nicely. I've got my medium pointy brush, but if you don't have that, just grab your smallest and let's go ahead and sketch them in first. And then again, we'll have more control over how thick the poles go. So on either side of her skirt, I'm gonna start on the left-hand side so that I don't drag my hand through my sketch. So the one time that I actually remember to not start on the right-hand side and then have to worry about that. I'm gonna go ahead and give the background one so that we've got something to start from. So right next to her skirt, maybe within a finger's width from her skirt, or kind of in this pocket here, however high your walkway goes, you want it to go at least about halfway, and then we'll start to get the globe on top. So you want it to go about halfway up there, and these will probably stay about that width, maybe a little bit thicker. And that'll give them, I'll put them even farther into the background. From there, let's go ahead and give it about a finger distance. And then about midway up the green section, we're gonna go ahead and put another lamp post. This will get thicker so you can make a messy line. We'll get it thicker in no time. And then maybe about 2 fingers, depending on how much room you feel like you've got, give it about 2 fingers. And then this lamppost can go as high as even above. Well, actually, let's go about at the level of her umbrella, the top of her umbrella, and then when we put the globe, it'll sit up there. So about in line with here, maybe about a finger in from the left-hand side. Let's go ahead and give yourself a little dot if you need to, depending on how it helps you draw it. Again, we're gonna thicken these lines, so if this line is messy, just make it messy, no bigs. And then no matter how thick you make it, you just want this to be middle thickness and this one to be the thickest because it is the closest. So I like to start by just kind of pushing down maybe the width of this brush. And apparently I'm gonna be messy painter today. Doesn't have to be a straight line, I say as I make a very not straight line. If you make a real bad boo-boo right there, just take your finger and kind of smudge it out. That's the fastest way to just kind of push out the paint, is a lot easier. If you're painting caffeinated, you like to paint dangerously. I admire that. Nothing like trying to do calligraphy caffeinated. Okay. It's impressionism. It doesn't have to be attractive. All right. And then this one, again, just needs to be middle thickness. This is where it gets really important that her umbrella be probably as dry as possible because I plant my hand to try to steady it. So I drag it through whatever paint is there. And so it's a really good thing to just make sure between your steps things are dry. And if you're looking at it and you decide this one's like way too thin compared to this one, just kind of adjust their thicknesses however makes sense. Each painting is going to be completely different, so don't feel like you have to match in any way. I'm going to do this on the other side now. I'll probably just leave you to your own devices while I try to control the shakes long enough to get these in here. So this one is again at least a finger's width away. It's over here. I'm going to do that. It goes to about middle of the red. If it goes a little bit taller, we can just put the dome, the globe, on top of the black if we need to, or we can take the other one up a little bit higher, whatever you need to do to adjust if it's not exactly even on both sides, which mine are not. And just try to match them on either side so it really looks like they're mirrors of each other. More or less. Okay. It's a mess. I love it. So we can go in and add kind of the outlines in the center if we want to. Before I do that though, I'm gonna go ahead and add the final touch to the leaves in the background. You can do that with your medium-sized brush, or let's go ahead and do it with our medium brush. Now we can just do a little bit more delicate leaves if we want to. So I'm gonna do a color close to the dove gray, maybe this middle color back here, maybe not as bright white. It doesn't have to be precise though. I just want it to be more pale than the greenery that is gray. I want it to be more pale than that kind of the first layer that we had done. It's gonna be the highlights that come from the center and kind of come out into our leaves. So you can start out here, see if it's the right color, and then start pouncing into the leaves out to the side. And this will just bring little bits of highlights, and you can cover up some areas where maybe your lighter or darker colors just didn't blend in the way that you want to. This can be kind of a transition color. So I'm twisting this brush. If you don't have a pointy one, you're just going to do the exact same thing that we had done before. Just make sure that all of these don't kind of go as a ring around the perimeter here. You want a couple of these light pieces to visit the really dark areas as well. So it really looks like the trees in the background are shining through some in the foreground. Get all the way up to your lampposts. Make sure you don't just avoid those. And this is just where you can kind of bring back any light areas that you want into your leaves. Just bringing some diversity out there of grays. This is just where you can kind of pick it up where it got too dark. And try to make sure they're not equidistant from each other. You do want to go in and maybe create little groupings of them. A couple of them run into each other. And this is where I'm kind of wiping out where I took the dark in a little bit farther than I really wanted. Give her a little bit more space above her head. And then if you want to, we can start doing the falling leaves as well. There are some that are dark now that go in between, and it just makes it look like it really is fall, and this is really maybe windstorm coming out. You can wait to do these as well if you want to. But I just like the movement that they bring in. I'm gonna go down into the walkway as well, all the way around her. Try to have some that transition in between your shapes, between the dark and light. So it's not always just like in this little box here. It's got to run into the lamp post and around it, off the edges of the canvas. That will make your painting feel a lot more balanced. Even in front of her umbrella if you're feeling dangerous. Okay. And then, just because we're here with our dark paint, I'm going to go ahead and do the shadows underneath her feetses. Just these lines, these dashes that go underneath about the width of her shoes going downwards. And then, again, because we're here, I'm going to clean out my brush really thoroughly. Don't forget the pause button if you guys are following along. I just did about 3 different steps. And if you are not with me, just go ahead and pause if you need to. Or don't forget the rewind button is a thing. So what we want to do with these reflections is take them down straight from the lamp posts. We're not going to put the globes of light up top quite yet because we do want those leaves, whatever we just did, to be dry first. So we're just going to go ahead and from that lamp post do some stripes going down, and you can do this with your square brush or with this one. Just leave some areas, breaks in between, and then dashes of just a couple different lengths coming down all the way to the end of your canvas. Make it just look a little reflective down here even more. I like to get my brush strokes a little bit narrower as they go upwards, and then you can even thicken them as they come down, so it really feels like even the reflection's coming at you. Try to make sure that they're not try not to make sure, that they're not exactly the same brush stroke the whole way down, the same thickness or the same distance from each other. I have to go in and kind of mess up my desire to be tidy. But you can see with that, it's so far away, it should be a little bit thinner up there. And then we're gonna go ahead and thicken as it comes downwards towards the viewer, towards us. And do that on either side. You can switch to whatever brush you're feeling comfortable with for this part. This one's a little bit challenging if you're using this brush because it comes to a point, so it's hard to do those reflections with kind of the square edges. So just switch to a square brush if you want to. And this just makes the walkway just seem so much more like it's got water pooling on it. Just gives a nice reflection. All right, we're gonna go ahead and give all the outline to the center, and then we'll go ahead and put the globes on top of the lights once that's just a little bit more dry. So I'm gonna take my very finest brush, whatever that is for you. And you just wanna make sure you're not dragging your hand through anything that is wet. My light poles are dry, but you do want to be just really cautious of dragging anything in the way. So if you want to dry your canvas, or if you just want to turn it upside down, whatever you feel like works for you. To get my black ready to do lining, what I do is I kind of scoop up some water, stir it into a pile or a little side of my black so that it turns it inky, not so much that it is watery, but just enough that it is ready to flow easily, because the more you have to brush, the thicker your line's going to get. So you only want to have to brush it once, and so let's go ahead and make the paint flow all on its own. So what I want to do once I've kind of stirred in this pile, I'm then going to twist my brush so that it goes back to its narrow point. It's full of watered down paint, so it's going to flow really well. But it's not going to be a very big brush, because of course the more paint that's in there, the more the bristles have to expand to accommodate that paint. In order to keep it small, we can water down our paint and we can twist out the extra so that it is exactly the size that we want. Now if I drag my hand through my paint, I kind of want to just keep my eye where I am. There's nothing wet right here, so I'm going to try to plant my hand here and keep my arm from dragging through the white. And I'm going to go ahead and start outlining her umbrella. This is a good time to quietly reflect. Try not to talk through it, and try not to hold your breath when you are concentrating. That will make your lines even shakier. So try to breathe while you're doing it. I know when you concentrate, you hold your breath. Try to breathe. Think of it as yoga. You gotta breathe through the movements. And then in the center, you're gonna give yourself a nice dot that can cover up any boo-boos that happen in there. Make it as big as you need. And then you're gonna go ahead and do lines in between your colors. And then to make it a little bit more umbrella-like, you can extend those out to those little rod corners that go out from those shapes. If you decide to use a straight edge of any kind while you're doing this, be careful that you wipe off the straight edge before you transition to the next color, as well as making sure that you don't really paint up against it, because if your paint is especially watered down to make it flow, it'll pool underneath and you'll get a nice smear that you will not love. So just make sure you're careful if you use a straight edge. You'll get better lines, of course, but just use it smart. You can still do a second layer of color on top of these, even after you've done your black outlining. So don't feel like you're forced to stop after this. When you're done with the umbrella, you can outline maybe her skirt. And then if you want to outline her legs in black, you can. I'll just do it in a dark gray. I just want to pop off the background a tiny bit more, but not as high of a contrast. So I'm gonna go ahead and outline her skirt, even a little bit of her belt if you want to. And you can even take some brush strokes of black and divide the pleating just a little bit more. Just get a little bit. I like to maybe do that towards the edges of the skirt where the darkest shadows would be coming up. The edges and the sides rather than the center, like that. And then if you need to outline her shoes in any way or fix any shadows underneath, you can. Now that our paint is dry, the grays aren't going to mix in and tint each other. They're going to stay separate. So you can layer on top now safely. I'm going to mix that dark gray to go around her legs, even doing that dividing line between her calves if you want to. Again, just a darker gray, not black, just darker than the walkway. When I drag my hand through paint on accident, really quickly just kind of wipe off your finger and then you go right back to painting. What is the problem is not necessarily when you plant into it, that can smear, but it's more like when you move your hand and press that wet paint into something. So if that happens, just wipe off your hand, move on. Painting in black and white is so fun, but it is a lot of continual adjusting. So if you feel like you're having to remix your grays again and again to make sure that they're not the same as the ones next to them, that's just part of the game. It is the fun of doing black and white, is just figuring out how to get those perfect shades that sit next to each other very well. I'm gonna go ahead and rinse out that brush really thoroughly because I want to do white. And I'll paint the smallest globes in the background with this, and then I'll probably switch to my medium-sized brush for the large ones. Now for this pure white, it is totally normal to need 2 layers. As with anything that you want a pure white color or pure color, the second layer will always look more bold, more pure. So you can make these whatever shape you want. I'm just gonna go with the round one, just like in the original. You can see it's not that bright, especially in contrast with the pale gray that we had started out with. So I'm kind of piling it on as much as I can so I don't necessarily have to do a second layer, but it'll always look better with a second layer. If you want to do kind of a Van Gogh thing, you can do a swirl and do little lines around that circulate, little dashes. You can do the Van Gogh kind of light and it will look really cute with this painting. Make them as large as you want, and then you can just transition to your next one. I'm going to grab my medium-sized brush for that. You always want to use the biggest brush for the job so you can fill things in more evenly. And then just a larger globe, medium size, larger than the last one, not as big as you plan for the largest one to be. And then however high you want this one, you can put it on top of the pole if you want. Just make sure it's a nice, healthy circle. And then try to get it similarly placed and a similar size over here. More or less. And if someone gets so close to your painting that they start comparing the circles of your lights, just poke them in the eye. That's what your brushes are for. Just keep them on hand for later. If someone gets too close to a painting, just get them. All right. These look somewhat similar to each other. You would tell me otherwise, right? So one of the last things that you could do if you want to add just a little bit more detailing is find a medium gray that works against the background colors, isn't too dark. You can go ahead and add little twigs if you'd like to. You'll see in the original painting example that came with your kit, there's little bits of twigs that cut through. You can even do it with black if you want to, but I like to add little bits of branches just to fill in these gaps. And until you get all of the elements of the painting, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what's gonna actually be a gap. So I'm just gonna do little bits of branches just in between. And if you again wanna do some black coming out from the darkest part of the trees, you can, but it's nice to just do a little bit of detailing to fill in any gaps. Or even some just dark leaves or something if you want. But as you are finishing up your painting, make sure you lean away from your painting, look at it from a distance, see if from the big picture perspective it needs to have anything added. Up close, can't really tell because you see every brush stroke, but from a distance you see the big picture. So that is where you want to judge your painting. So again, lean back, see if there needs to be more leaves added or more branches or anything like that. Especially now that you've got every piece of the painting in, you can see. I like to go in with the little brush and do the final details. Little leaves that look like they're a little bit farther away because they're so small. And then that is the final step. I hope you guys had a lot of fun painting along with me, and don't forget you guys can order the kit for this whole project with the stencil already on the canvas at uncorkedcanvas.com, and we can't wait to paint with you next time. Bye bye now. Make sure you like and subscribe so you never miss out on the next big thing from Uncorked Canvas.